Okay, if members will find their way to their seats, we'll get this started. I've been told that there's a few members of the committee that want to get on the road. And I promise we'll be through by 7.
We have PSC first.
Do what?
Kelly Henson from PSC is first.
Right. First up on our agenda today, first person up on the agenda, and this is the Appropriations Subcommittee for Education. And we're going to hear from Dr. Henson, who has been to the doctor, swears he's not infectious.
I want to tell you that I really appreciate you moving my remarks from Tuesday to today because I couldn't have gotten down here Tuesday. So thank you very much for that accommodation.
There was a motion to just cancel your part, but we held out for you.
We're doing some exciting work at PSC, but I'm going to limit my comments today to the powerful changes that we are putting in place and those that relate to the governor's budget recommendations. You will find the Professional Standards Commission on page 9 of your tracking document. For several years, the Professional Standards Commission has been working with higher education, RESAs, and K-12 school systems on an enhanced accountability system for teacher and leader preparation programs. When the system is fully implemented, 50% of the new preparation program effectiveness measures will be based on program graduates' performance in the classroom. Other factors include content knowledge, surveys of employers and program graduates, and other performance data. You will note on line 26.8.6 that the governor has recommended funding for 2 education specialists for PSC. These 2 positions are necessary for us to switch to this new accountability system, since we are moving from a system where we look at program performance data every 7 years to a system in which we look at program performance data each and every year, and that's looking at over 900 programs every year. Exemplary programs in this new accountability system will be rewarded, and struggling programs will receive assistance, be monitored closely, and if struggling programs do not improve, they will lose their approval. This, of course, creates significant additional workload for our educational staff specialists, but the most important thing to remember is this: it will ensure that the quality of teacher and leader preparation programs in Georgia is uniformly high. Next item, through a highly collaborative process, PSC has also completely revamped our certification system to create a 4-tiered certification structure. The new structure ensures that new teachers are better prepared by requiring a performance-based content pedagogy assessment. Our GACE tests measure candidates' content knowledge, and the new assessment, the EdTPA, measures in layman's terms whether they can teach children. The EdTPA utilizes video recordings and is scored by a highly trained external evaluator. Together, these 2 tests should assure that candidates that complete student teaching in Georgia are ready for Georgia classrooms. Tiered certification also offers increased opportunities for professional growth for teachers who remain in the classroom and ties certificate renewal to performance. However, the new certification structure, along with the verification of lawful presence, has significantly increased the workload of our certification specialists. Verification of lawful presence alone has accounted for a 40% increase in transactions from FY13 to 14. An additional state-funded certification evaluator, as recommended by the governor on line 26.8.6, will be necessary to maintain excellent customer service and what we believe is the best certification turnaround time in the nation. The first certificate under the new tiered structure is a pre-service certificate for student teachers. Georgia is a national leader in ethics enforcement, and we deal with about 125 new ethics cases every month. The pre-service certificate is a way for us to become a leader not only in enforcement, but also in prevention. It is intended for candidates completing student teaching in Georgia and requires the admission to an initial certification program. It requires that they undergo a successful criminal history check, and most importantly, from a prevention standpoint, it requires student teachers to complete newly developed educator ethics learning modules. The ethics learning modules are a powerful instructional tool that ensures all candidates not only know the ethics, code of ethics, but also have the necessary ethical understanding to guide their decisions. Candidates will complete the modules as a learning experience as they enter their program, and then again upon an exit requirement. With the pre-service certificate, student teachers are now under the code of ethics, which means student teachers are governed by the same ethics rules and sanctions as all other teachers in our state. To help us implement the pre-service certificate, and in particular, to help us implement criminal history checks and associated investigations for pre-service teachers, the governor has recommended funding for one additional investigator, also on line 26.8.6. Our new accountability system for educator preparation programs and a new certification structure are, as you can imagine, very heavily dependent on IT, and you will see a recommendation on line 26.8.5 to provide an additional $100,000 to allow us to contract for the necessary skill sets to keep these systems up to date and functioning properly. All other changes recommended by the governor on lines 26.8.1 through 26.8.4 are statewide changes that appear in other agencies' budgets as well. I always enjoy coming and speaking with y'all. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Are there questions from members of the committee?
And I apologize for the coughing and wheezing. I'm sorry.
The modules that you talked about on the ethics, are those online?
Yes.
Is that how that's going to be?
And I'd love to show them to you sometime. Very professionally developed, and they present real life scenarios for teachers and leaders that they deal with every day, whether it be failure to report, confidentiality, testing and assessment, et cetera, et cetera. We really want to be as strong in prevention as we are in enforcement. We're the best state in this nation when it comes to ethics enforcement. There's no question about that. But the difficulty there, folks, is when our commission issues a sanction, as necessary as that sanction is, the damage is already done. It's done to an educator, it's done to a school or district's reputation, and most tragically, it's sometimes already done to a child. So we are really putting a focus on what can we do regarding education, outreach, and prevention.
All right. You might want to show those to Chairman Coleman's committee. I think they might need it. Anybody else with a question?
Again, thank you very much for accommodating me today. I appreciate it.
Yes, we appreciate you being here. Thank you. Oh, I thought you were saying something about the modules.
Can they go home? Get some rest.
Okay. Office of Student Achievement. An Office of Student Achievement you will find on page 9 also.
Our information is on
page 9 also, 26.12. I think you are all aware of what we do at the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, so unless you have questions, I will skip that part of the remarks for the sake of conserving time and address directly the items in the budget proposal. 26.12.5 and 6 relate to the auditing function in our office. The salary and benefits for the auditor position that was funded in Race to the Top is part of that work. We had initially anticipated not needing to continue that position, but the Department of Education's development and implementation of a new testing and assessment system that will be moving over the next few years to online testing as well as paper and pencil testing has led us to believe that we need to continue that position because we will now be auditing in 2 separate systems. We'll continue the paper and pencil auditing, which those results have remained stable over the last few years. We have very small numbers of schools and classrooms being flagged, but the move to the online system is going to mean we're doing 2 separate pieces of work in addition where we have been doing one. The part of that money also, $150,000 of the funds there, will be used to develop the erasure analysis procedures for the new assessment. Every time you change assessments, you have to develop new protocols and procedures, and actually we're on the cutting edge of developing the erasure analysis procedures for the online assessments. It is possible to do, but not many folks have done it ever or done it well, so those are things that we will be utilizing those funds to support. 26.12.7, the funds for Georgia Awards will be used to support the 20% of the salaries and benefits for those 5 staff members that were funded by Race to the Top in FY15. We had funds to pay those salaries through September 15th during the fiscal year 15, and so these funds will cover that portion of those salaries that were paid by Race to the Top, salaries and benefits. Item number 26.12.8 will be funds for the Innovation Fund, and these funds will actually allow us to expand the focus on the Governor's priority to build out STEM capabilities in the state, specifically thinking about the development of computer science and other fields in that area. One of the things that we plan to do, if these funds are appropriated, is to work with some of the counties in South Georgia specifically that are having difficulties attracting and retaining and developing their STEM teachers, and we want to provide them with some very targeted grant opportunities to be able to do that with those additional funds. The funds for 15 were awarded in the priorities of applied learning, STEM, and teacher and leader development. We awarded 10 planning grants to applicants that were $10,000 each to allow them to develop a proposal that they would then begin to implement. No promise of future funds from us, just to give them some opportunity to study and develop their plans in those priority areas. We awarded 3 implementation grants for $1.2 million approximately each for grantees to develop in those fields, and 5 scaling grants for successful grant programs already in place that will be scaled out either into other systems or expanded within the existing system where that program was in place. And I can answer more detailed questions about that if you all have specific questions you'd like to ask.
Right. Would you, I talked with you earlier, there is in the code a requirement for some sort of report to the General Assembly on, which I assume will go into more detail than that.
Oh, yes, sir. I have all kinds of detail. I just didn't think you wanted to hear all of that here.
No,
but
well,
we can provide you with detailed information about the results from the Race to the Top funds that were awarded in innovation grants. We will be doing the final evaluation on those at the end of this fiscal year and coming out with that, but we will also be able to provide you with all the information you want about the awards made in the FY15 with the $5 million, as well as the progress of that work to date. So we can provide it in writing, or I'll be glad to come and present to committee however you would like to do that.
Well, I would assume that at some point you're required to send it over in writing, so
We can do that.
depending on
Absolutely.
when that timing takes place, that would be fine. But
Okay.
Chairman Coleman, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was I think it was last year, there was $5 million placed in for special. Where's that? Is that, that was, and how's that being used?
Those are the funds I was talking about when
That's
I
what I
said
thought.
we were doing the 10 planning grants,
That's where you're using it, for the planning grant.
Exactly.
Is there any,
Not just for planning grants. The 10 planning grants, the 3 implementation grants, and then the 5 scaling grants.
is there any way of replenishing that money? Are we replenishing it, or?
We are in the process, and have been in the process for quite some time now, of establishing the 501c3 fund. That paperwork has been in the hands of the IRS, and we're at the mercy of the IRS. But we have worked with the attorneys available to us here and with the Attorney General's office to get that all ready and submitted. And I actually got a letter from the IRS yesterday saying they were working on it. Didn't tell us anything about it, but they were working on it. So we hope that in the next few months we should be able to have an answer from them, and then we can actually start actively raising funds, donations
Chairman, may I ask
from
one more question?
corporations.
Another thing, when you met with us earlier in the session, you talked about the Governor's Honors Program, which I was really impressed. Was there enough additional money to do what you talked about, expanding the day for these students so they wouldn't have a lot of downtime?
The additional funds that were requested in the amended 15 budget will allow us to do that, and actually that's the next item on the list here. The 26.12.9 will be additional funds for the FY16 Governor's Honors Program for the same purposes. Actually, we had 2 primary purposes. We learned from our experience last summer that we needed to increase the safety aspects of the program and to increase the rigor of the academic program. We have a number of students attending the program now that are in very rigorous high school situations, some of them in magnet and STEM-focused schools. I had students last summer from science, technology magnet schools that came to Governor's Honors, and in the science field they dissected snails, and they're doing STEM research in their high schools. So we have to ramp it up a little bit, but that's the purpose of the $413,170 in that line item. Absolutely. To allow us to increase the safety pieces around the medical facilities and the counselors that we would need, and increase the faculty stipends and ramp up the curriculum. Okay. The big item, 26.12.10, which is the $10 million for professional learning that was put into law in 2012 but has not yet been funded. This is funds that would support strategic professional development initiatives. It was Senate Bill 404 in the 2012 session, and they're intended to support statewide professional learning initiatives. Our plans for that would be really to focus in on 4 areas, but 2 primary priorities, and then depending on the availability of funds, we would move forward into the other 2. The first would be to work with the Reading Mentor program that we already have in place. We already have plans to redesign, expand, and scale that reading coaching program to accomplish the Governor's strategic goal of having all students read on grade level by the end of 3rd grade. We know from the work that we've done so far that we need to focus on the development of languages and literacy, K through 3. We have been providing coaching, but we have plans already in place to retool for the following year to provide even more intensive coaching and training for early childhood and early elementary teachers. We want to make sure that they're effective at diagnosing struggling readers, and then also effective at implementing a varied number of instructional strategies that will have high impact. Some of the things that we want to incorporate, in addition to what we've already been doing, which has really been focused on the 5 primary areas of reading instruction: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, will be to develop and train our staff in multisensory structured learning methodologies for students. Many of these are students that have very challenging learning problems. We want to develop and actually partner with some other folks in the state who are developing. The Atlanta Speech School is developing an online resource, the Cox Campus, for working with teachers of reading and providing professional learning. We want to partner with them and utilize those resources to support our teachers and the teachers in the school. Summer training for the teachers. We don't want to take the reading teachers out of the classroom at all, but we want to be able to work with them in their classrooms in a number of different ways, through the online resources that we will partner with others and then continue to build out, through virtual coaching, as well as sending our coaches into the schools. One of the things that we've learned from the work that we've done so far is that what we have done in the last 3 years in the initial phase of the program was to assign a reading coach to 2 or 3 schools, and they spent 2 or 3 days a week in those schools. We've learned from our experience that while that is effective, we don't believe that's the most efficient use of those resources. We feel like we can accomplish a lot by more strategic in-person coaching and a lot more coaching through online tools that we now have available to us, and through virtual coaching, which we'll be training our coaches in. So our intent is to expand. We've been working in 22 school districts, 2 or 3 schools in each district, and our intent is to expand that and make the opportunity available to any school in the state that wants to apply. We will expand our staff as needed to support those teachers in those schools, and we will also provide the schools with a stipend to support the costs that they might incur for the summer training for their teachers to travel to the training that we would provide, although we would provide it regionally, and to support the implementation of a DIBELS assessment measure so that we have a way to measure the effectiveness of the professional learning that we would be providing those teachers.
Have you put a budget to this? I mean, we've allocated X number of dollars for
No, I have.
this change, or what it's going to cost? I mean,
No, I don't have.
Where did we come up with the $10 million figure?
The $10 million figure is based on the formula that's in the legislation from 2012, and it's 0.4% of the teacher salaries, if I'm stating that correctly. So that's where the dollar amount came from. So I haven't broken these priorities down into a specific budget yet, because it hasn't been allocated in the past. I can tell you that we've been spending about $1.75 million on serving the 22 school districts that we've been serving through the Reading Mentor program, about that much per year. Again, we're planning on some efficiencies and economies that would allow us to use those funds to serve more, but we would also be developing some online tools and resources and partnering to have some of those that would add some expense as well. Another primary focus would be developing STEM teachers, particularly in the area of computer science. You know, that's another focus and priority of the governor. You've heard him say that more than half of the projected job growth in the STEM fields is in the computing occupations, and that we have a strong need to strengthen the availability of coding and programming instruction. Actually, I believe right now approximately 18% of the high schools in Georgia now offer AP computer science, and I think it's less than 1% of our high school students actually have the opportunity to take those courses. I've actually been sitting in some of the meetings that have been going on because the governor asked the Board of Regents and the State Board of Education to focus on how they could provide some additional opportunities for courses that students could take in order to satisfy some of the graduation requirements and entrance requirements for the post-secondary systems. And there's been a series of meetings at the Department of Education. There's actually another one going on right now to focus in on that. And one of the things that I have heard loudly and clearly in those conversations is that we need to develop the capability of teachers. We have a lot of teachers who know that work but who may not be fully certified to teach that work, or a lot of teachers who know part of that work but need some support and strengthening to be able to build out those opportunities. So obviously, if more than half the jobs are going to be in those fields and we have less than 1% of our students taking the course that we have right now, there's going to be a big need for a lot of support in those fields. We also feel that it's going to be important to expand the national math and science initiatives in military communities. We have a number of students moving in and out of those communities, and we know that that's an important focus for them. In fact, recently, in support of the conversations around the improvement of the Governor's Honors Program, I went to Augusta and met with a number of members of the faculty of the Georgia Regents University and Fort Gordon staff from their cyber science initiative there. And one of the things that they emphasized over and over again is their need to recruit and develop any candidates in the computer science fields, not only for Georgia Regents and those related health science and other technological fields, but also in the military, with a specific focus on recruiting and developing female and minority candidates in those fields. So they were very concerned about that. We know that's a very big need. We'll be able to leverage some things. I mean, there's some training available in the Georgia Virtual School already, but we need to develop additional resources and avenues and provide additional support for teachers in that area. Another field that we know we need to use these funds to support is mathematics, particularly K-8. I think any of you that participated in the listening sessions you had around the state last year and the State Board of Education listening sessions clearly heard, emphasized over and over again the need for additional supports for teachers of math in kindergarten through 8th grade specifically, more so than in high school. And again, I want to reemphasize the importance of leveraging the technology so that we can really build out some resources that won't pull teachers out of the classroom. In the last couple of years, I had opportunity to visit this is just a parallel story here, but I visited the Kia plant in West Point with the Alliance of Agency Heads, and one of the things that I heard there that really surprised me was that they have such limited inventory on site that if there's a wreck that blocks up I-85, they might have to stop the line. So I say that as thinking about, and I know from years past my experience working with Milliken, they want a lot. They don't want a lot of inventory on hand. They want to have things just in time, just as needed. I think many times we have spent a lot of time and energy training our teachers in things we thought they were going to need to know, and taking them out and having them in workshops and putting them, in all-day sessions or training them in something in the summer that then they didn't use, didn't need, didn't retain, and didn't implement. So I think our focus in leveraging the technology tools that we have and in utilizing these funds should be in building tools that will allow our teachers to access resources and supports, training for them that will be just-in-time resources. So if they have a student that has a challenge, they have a lesson that they need support in leveraging, they have those tools available to them when they're needed, anytime they're needed, and they have a lot of flexibility in accessing that. I think technology now provides us a lot of ability to do that, and we need to effectively leverage that. We also can use the learning design that technology tools would allow us to develop to support the way we know adults learn. We learn best when we can practice, get feedback, and support, and we learn best when it can be interactive. That's how adults like to learn. We don't like to sit and get, and that's been what we've done for a long time. So the examples that I think we should focus in on would be those kinds of instructional support systems, e-coaching and mentoring, online professional networks where teachers can work with peers and others to provide support and share ideas, online courses and conferences that are available as needed, podcasts, all kinds of tools that we used to not have. Informational organizing tools. There are a tremendous number of tools existing in Georgia that we need to identify and tag and let teachers rate. The Department of Education has done some of this work. We need to continue that work and build that out. And also something that I think we should consider doing and leverage some of these funds to do is look at the utilization of some games and simulations to again get at the effective adult learning, especially some of our younger teachers would really access and utilize. So I'll stop there and see what questions you have. I'll be glad to try to answer any.
Questions? No? You may be off the hook. If you got something else? We will look forward to more information, though, on the grants and and on the breakdown on the professional development.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the moment you've all been waiting for. Department of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The tracking document that I have has the Department of Education starting on page 38 of 101. Is that the same as you have? No, sorry. So if you don't mind, I'm going to be talking off of the Department of Education house tracking sheet. I'm not sure what page you have. Page? Starts on page 2? Oh, very good. So I apologize for that, but I'm going to assume that all the tracking numbers will be the same.
Would you like to have her copy to speak from?
Yes, well, yes, thank you.
You can give us the one you have that has notes on it.
As tempting as that was, you notice I didn't take the bait. Yes, thank you. As you probably are aware, there are a number of changes that are statewide, and you'll see them reflected on the tracking sheet with that S in a bracket. So I won't address any of those changes until we get to QBE, where there is actually a teacher retirement adjustment, which is significant. And I'll just go to the programs where we see changes outside of those that are typical, I understand, in all the programs for ERS, TRS, recruitment and retention, Georgia TeamWorks, and Department of Administrative Services self-insurance. So on 23.8.3, you will see that there is a reduction in the funding for the GNETS program, and this is only a reflection of a change in the FTEs, or the number of students in that program. On 23.8.4, there is an increase the governor is recommending of $128,000. That is for a position that would be a state-funded position for statewide coordination of the GNETs. This is a position that is considered very important by the state board as well, in that there are a lot of concerns about GNETs, and there are some transition activities going on currently that relate to how we support GNET students as they go back to the schools. So, for example, we talked about the reduction in students. Those students, actually, many of them are going back to the schools, and so the Office of Planning and Budget is working right now on a project to make sure that as the students are remaining in the schools more often, that there's a network of support that is available beyond just the actual physical GNETS locations. And so that is really what the program manager position is about.
That'll be housed at DOE.
Well, it would report to the DOE. I'm not sure what the location would be. I would imagine it would be at the department. $123.10.6. This is an increase of $1.6 million, and this is part of the PeachNet project. This is the state share of the additional cost to increase the bandwidth speed from 3 meg to 100 meg. Again, this is related to, I'm sorry, are you able to find it? This is related to the MOU that we have with Regents, and we understand the cost basis is based upon RFPs that Regents has done in order to accomplish the build-out and the network. So this is the backbone. This is actually a very exciting ad. I will mention once again and remind everyone that the state only pays about a fourth of the cost. So the federal government through E-rate is actually going to be putting in about 3 times this amount. It won't show up in the K-12 budget, but they are heavily subsidizing this as well. So it's extremely exciting. It's going to allow us to go to 100 meg per school. The intended rollout is starting July 1st for all schools to be able to have 100 meg. all throughout the state. 23.11.3, which is non-QBE formula. The RTC grant, the governor has a reflection of $141,000 reduction. That is intended to be an adjustment per the FTE or student count. I will point out that there's some discussion with the budget offices as to whether that's the actual final number. We actually believe that there may actually be more students than what was reflected in December when the governor was first doing the count. So, Mr. Chairman, we'll be working with the budget offices, but it does appear to us at this point that there may be a need to increase this line a little bit and not decrease it by the $141,000. But again, the governor's intent in this budget was to reflect actuals, and it's not any kind of a policy change. The adjustment for the sparsity grant, 23.11.4, predominantly that reduction is a reflection of the elimination of hold harmless. And just as a reminder, when we changed sparsity, there were some legacy systems who had been receiving sparsity under an older calculation. The department changed the calculation so that we could update it and look at it every 5 years. When we changed the calculation, it affected the recipients, the legacy recipients, if you will. So as we often do when there's a change to the formula, there was an agreed upon 1 year hold harmless. And so the base coming into 16 included hold harmless amounts which were not intended to be funded in 16. So what the governor is reflecting predominantly in this reduction is the elimination of the hold harmless, and that simply means that all of the legacy recipients of sparsity will receive the normal formula amount that all of the other recipients, the new recipients, will receive. So this will put everybody on an equal basis. The hold harmless amount was intended to be a 1 year or one-time adjustment. There's also a slight increase, even though there's a negative, in growth. So sparsity went up slightly because of growth, but you're seeing the reduction, and that is the result of the elimination of hold harmless. 23.14 is QBE equalization. Many members will be familiar probably with the discussion around the 15 amended budget, where there is a difference of calculation between the governor's process and the House calculation. The House calculation is very similar to the Department of Education's calculation. As we talked about in the past, the governor has submitted numbers predicated on a calculation for the last 3 years, if you count 16. It just so happens that for 14 and 15, while the governor submitted that particular formula request, the amount that was funded was consistent with the House calculation. So it is a big issue. It's a $15.8 million difference. Again, I think many of you are familiar with that because of the discussion in the 15 amended budget. So subject to your questions, that's all I'll say about that.
Well, I'll ask you this.
Yes, sir.
Thought you were going to get off the hook, didn't you? How much difference is there between the House calculation and the DOE calculation?
There is actually a slight difference that's related to the middle school, middle grades. It's almost $2 million, but it's because of the middle school, middle grades. So I think we're actually, that aside, that was just a nuance.
When did the $2 million show up? Because it was a matter of several thousand last time I
Well, we
talked
didn't
about
include that because that was I think that was an agreed upon difference. So the House and the DOE are almost exact except for that nuance, and we've agreed that the middle school, middle grades issue was a difference in calculation that we won't include.
Who's included the middle school difference, DOE or us?
It was a change. I think the House had looked differently at the middle school, middle grade, and it was a change. The General Assembly changed the QBE formula. The middle school grades was eliminated.
Right.
And all of the formulas that had been utilizing middle school grades needed to be adjusted. All the formulas were adjusted. I think that some of the House calculations didn't adjust all of them. Again, that's a nuance. As it relates to the actual calculation, the difference between the House position and the way the DOE calculated, there's almost no dollar difference. And of course, the governor's difference relates to And this is, I think, what the Office of Planning Budget was pointing out. It's really odd that we have about 39 students who are causing a $15 million difference. And it is really because of the nuance of how the state average or guaranteed rate is calculated. Or said differently, those 49 students mean that the 9th district to be excluded is different. And so we're calculating, the House and DOE and the governor's office are calculating the guaranteed amount slightly differently because we're including different LEAs. And because that guaranteed rate is amplified, that is multiplied by every single recipient of equalization, that's how such a small number of students can impact the formula so greatly. In the past 2
But
years,
the House and DOE are using the same systems in their calculations.
yes, sir. As it relates to the fundamental difference here, the DOE and the House are using exactly the same methodology. You asked about the dollar amount on equalization, and I only mentioned the fact that they're slightly different, but the budget offices have already agreed. But as it relates to this calculation difference, the DOE and the House are utilizing the same calculation methodology. And so the difference there is about $15.8 million between the governor's position and the House position.
So, just out of curiosity, if we were to approve a budget that was based on this figure that's in front of us here, what is DOE going to do when it comes time to distribute money to the systems?
If we receive it, if an amount is appropriated that is the specific amount that we can tie to a spreadsheet, the auditor expectation is that we show the intent of the General Assembly and the governor's office, and so we would calculate and allocate the funds based on the spreadsheet from the governor's methodology. If the appropriation had language that talked about whether we're to use the House methodology, that is the precedent methodology, or whether we use the governor's, then we would be able to prorate the difference, if you will, keeping the existing recipients the same, just changing the dollar amount. But in the absence of a tracking language, we would have a hard time telling the auditors what the difference is. And frankly, what it gets back to is there are a lot of ways to calculate formulas, and they change. And despite the specificity that's in Title 20, we often see that there are slight differences and slight nuances that get greatly magnified. So 39 kids don't seem like a lot until you roll it through the formula, and before you know it, in the third year, you're seeing a $15 million difference.
You know, I've heard that you can have statistics prove whatever you want, but I've not really heard that you could use formulas to do that.
Well, here would be the point. The law is not specific enough for us to show the auditors how the calculation works. We have 3 sets. When the auditors come in and ask us, why did you send out this amount of money? Where's your documentation? And that is the question. We say, well, here it is. If we have a formula and a spreadsheet that comes down to that exact amount, and we can show that it was coming from one of the budget offices and it was one of the operative documents reviewed by the General Assembly and the governor's office, then we can say we understand the intent was to fund based on this formula. In the absence of that, and we've had you all put in tracking language, which has been accepted by the state auditors, if we can show the appropriation document includes tracking language that is telling us how it's calculated, then that too would be sufficient. But the auditors agree with DOE, agree with the governor, agree with the House, agree with the Senate, which is these things can be calculated a number of different ways. Now, what we tend to do at DOE is once a calculation is funded, that's the methodology we use. We look at precedent, because we're not suggesting we have the right answer, because everything is subject to appropriation. So this is why when the equalization law was changed in fiscal year 13, that is how we calculate the guaranteed minimum, everybody agreed on the calculation methodology. Then in fiscal year 14, the governor's office adjusted it slightly, and they've been consistent, and that slight change is how they reduce the non-resident students.
Let me ask you this
39
question.
kids.
Then.
Yes,
Let
sir.
me cut to the chase. Do you think your formula is right?
I think our formula is right in that it's precedent. And I think it would be very difficult for systems to understand why we changed the formula so dramatically in terms of $15 million. The unfortunate thing is it's because of 39 kids. But fundamentally, it would be problematic, I suspect, from the DOE's perspective, there would be one district that would be eliminated from equalization. And I think that would be the most extreme example of why it would not be good, because it would be very hard to explain to that district it's because of a formula change in the third year. Actually,
So
this would be the
essentially, we've
fourth
got to
year.
come up with about
It would be precedent.
$15 million.
Depending on where you come up with it, yes, sir.
We're going to reduce central office at DOE.
I don't think we have. I knew it.
Okay, I'll get off of that one now.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So 23.15 is the local 5 mil share. I just want to point out and remind members that that is actually, I guess you'd call it contra revenue. That is to say, the reason the state is putting more money in is because the local tax digests for the school districts went down in fiscal year 14 versus fiscal year 13. I only pointed out again that we're putting money in because the local tax digests went down. So that's local fair share is normally a reduction to what the state pays in QBE, but in this case, because the tax digests locally went down, the amount that we're having to put in, the amount that we're allowed, or that we do subtract from QBE, has gone down by that amount, $9.5 million. Now to the good news, we believe, which is the QBE program. As we said earlier, this is a very welcome addition. The governor's recommendation in the QBE program, which is 23.16, is over $500 million of additional funding. Roughly speaking, that's the growth, which we'll see on the next page, of $152 million. And that's a TRS change, and I should mention that, is 23.16.1. While that's a standard change, and I wasn't talking about that anywhere else, I will mention it here. That is a change for the teacher retirement system, but this is money that we send through QBE, so this is going to every teacher. And so the cost of, or the added revenue that we're putting into the formula is $75 million. That's a $75 million increase to support the pensions available to all the teachers funded through QBE. And then we have the usual FTE growth on 23.16.5. I say usual, and that is typically the largest amount in our budget. And that is a 1.33% growth at $152 million and 22,904 additional FTEs. So that's generally consistent with what we've had in terms of growth for the last 2 years. And then 23.16.9, a $280 million austerity reduction. So this is an increase to the QBE formula, which is of course is very well received. The intent is to eliminate teacher furlough days for those districts that may still have some. The intent is also to allow districts to continue to allow the local supplement to ensure that the number of days of instruction goes back to 180 or the equivalent thereof. I should mention that if this $280 million is funded, that will mean that the austerity reduction amount will go from 14.1% as a percentage of state funds in QBE in 2014 to the current 9.72. And then if this $280 million comes into fiscal year 16, that will bring the austerity reduction down to 5.8%, which is the lowest we've had since probably before 2008. So that is percentage-wise, that is a significant reduction in austerity, and that is going to be greatly received. The new austerity amount, if this $280 million is funded, will be $466 million. Again, by comparison, that is down from an austerity of $1.1 billion in 2014. So in 2 years, we will have gone from $1.1 billion down to $466 million.
This summer in the retreat, the board retreat, they talked about, we had that presentation on the math, and they were looking at the standard math and science, and it's down here, the 23.16.4 for the math and science teachers. Now, is that, because that's your regular teacher, but now, for the certified for the elementary teachers, we're trying to get them. Is that money too for that elementary group?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's also included. So there are two we fund two different types of math teacher. We fund the high school, where we bring them up to year 6
Right,
on the step, on
hard to
TRS.
find. That was that hard
For
to
elementary school, for math or science, it's a $1,000,
If
bonus.
they take the training.
They have to become certified first. If they take the certification and they teach.
Are we having a lot of them do that? Are you finding?
We have had a large increase. In fact, this $1 million, a lot of that is from new elementary school teachers that are coming
We
in.
found, that was one thing we found, that the problem we were having in our elementary math was the fact that the teachers weren't trained to do that, to do the.
Yes, and I think you heard from Martha and Todd from GOSA that
Yeah,
that's
that-
still a focus is
Yeah.
math and science training for elementary
They're
and middle
still
school.
doing, yeah, I see they're doing it, but this is the money I'm saying.
Yes, sir, but this is really the incentive for teachers to get the certification.
Okay.
So it's part of it. If I may continue, Mr. Chairman,
may.
School Improvement 23.18.6. There's a $2.4 million increase. Now, again, Chairman Coleman, you mentioned the board retreat, and you may remember the discussion we had about teaks and leaks and the rollout and the necessity for a certain number of support people in the school improvement group. We currently have 45 people working in this department, in this area. The state board had requested of the governor's office about 21 additional positions here in the school improvement group, and that is what is reflective here. So this, as you may remember, is what we had talked about with those positions, and this is to ensure that we support the support the school districts as they roll out the teacher evaluation model, as well as helping the principals with the leader evaluation model. 23.18.7 is an increase the governor is requesting for Teach for America. That would bring, we currently have about $125,000 in that, so that would be about $475,000 for Teach for America. We did have Race to the Top funds that were going to Teach for America that were supplementing the state amount. So this is intended, I think, to continue to have a larger number of Teach for America teachers available for the students. If I may, 23.22.6 is an increase for funds for vocational industry certification of $752,546, which sounds like a very specific amount, and it is. This is actually, many of you will recall, the Certiport contract, and Certiport is the test that is provided for technology training. And the intent here is to allow any student in Georgia, every high school in Georgia is allowed to take certification through Microsoft that is a viable industry recognized standard, and we put this in place starting this year, and this is a way of assuring that it continue to be funded. Just as a reminder, we have a lot of districts that have told us that while they're supporting career pathways, not all schools have a mechanism to provide career pathways to all of their students. So this was one of the commitments, both to IT, which is a strategic initiative, but also this was a way of the state being able to say, because it's actually one of the elements of the CCRPI, you have the ability to have your students reflect something positive in relation to their career pathway. So this is a way of every school in Georgia, one, being able to have their students in high school have certifications which could help lead to a better job, and secondly, will help all the schools to ensure that they have at least one very important pathway, and that is technology. Of course, this coupled with 100 meg bandwidth that will go down to every school starting in July 1st is, we think, a very significant improvement in supporting technology, which is probably the area of growth for what we hear from student desires and also for employers in terms of what they're looking for skill sets, and they want demonstrative skill sets. They don't want to say, Mr. Austinson, do you know how to do Microsoft Word? They would prefer to see a certification from Microsoft that's very official, and that's what this would provide. If I may move to, let's see, 23.23.6 in the testing area, there's a request for additional funds that will allow us to continue to have independent and third-party validation of the growth model. Now, the growth model, as many of you know, is a highly statistical-based model. It will become for many districts, particularly for Race to the Top, but as we roll out, it could become high stakes. That is, it will impact teacher evaluations, and eventually it could even impact teacher pay. And so the governor is wanting to make sure that we continue to have a very robust third-party, justifiable, something that would even hold up in court in the event that we started to get concerns or complaints about how we're doing the growth model. Additionally, and importantly, we want to make sure that all the teachers know that this is a very robust model that's not coming out of the bowels of DOE, but something that actually has been evaluated. There's a committee, a TAC committee, that evaluates it, and there will be lots of information available to the public about how it was calculated. And in the event that we have to defend it in court, we'll actually have expert testimony that we can rely upon. .23.7 is an increase that is based on the additional cost for the milestone test. You may remember that the 15 amended budget actually had a slightly higher number, and that is because we have a 5-year RFP. This increase is based on predominantly the increase in the milestones test. Of course, the milestone test is replacing the CRCT and the end of course test. So the K-8 and then also the 9-12 tests. The milestone tests are replacing them. The costs were higher in 15, or they will be higher this fiscal year, because we have a 5-year RFP. And as with many of our testing contracts, the RFPs tend to have more growth, more cost for development of questions in the first year. So it is a reflection of the actual cost for that particular milestone, increased milestone. And the reason it's less than we had to put in the amended is because there's less development cost for those test questions. I think I'd also need to mention that the governor's office was intent and has been clear that this amount, and we agree, will be sufficient to allow 2 tests in math. That would be for the end of course test. We want to be able to have, for those districts who want to choose, either discrete or integrated test options. Currently we have integrated. We have a number of systems that have said that they would like to be discrete. So while they will be the same standards in algebra and geometry for any student taking them, the path will be different. So there will be different, the 9th grade algebra will be different slightly than the 10th. So after a student takes algebra and geometry, they will have studied all the same standards, but the pacing will be different, and therefore the test has to be different. So it's not a terribly expensive change, but it is enough of a change that we have to have a different test administration with different standards and security, et cetera.
Mr. Chairman, that's only for 2 courses, though, isn't that right? Is that only for 2 courses? 2 years. 2 years. 2 years, yeah.
Yes, the governor's intent is to allow the discrete or integrated models, and that would impact 9th or 10th grade. End of course tests, to be specific. Yes, sir. There's no end of course test for the for Algebra 2, which would be the 3rd year math. So that wouldn't be impacted by this cost.
Okay.
And the last comment is there are 2 positions. Again, this is very similar to Chairman Coleman will remember what we talked about in the state board meeting, and he referenced that, and that was the October board retreat. In addition to the positions that you saw in school improvement, there are 2 key positions in testing and accountability. They are currently staffed, and this request will allow us to continue to have them on staff as the federal funds roll off. Mr. Chairman, subject to your questions, that's my presentation.
Are there questions from committee members?
Um, 23.19 on page 5, the Charter School Commission, the $2 million, is that the operation of the commission? Does any of that go to the school, or is that just the commission? My seatmate and I were trying to figure it out.
23.19. The Charter School Commission is administratively attached to the Department of Education. That's why they're showing up in our budget.
Okay.
This number, my understanding is this number is intended to reflect about a 2% charge. The law, I think, allows them to operate on up to a 3% charge being what they charge the commission district. So this commission is specifically intended to support the commission charters.
Right.
Right.
So those are administrative costs?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
That's
Again,
that's not
statutorily, it could be 3%, and I understand that this is consistent with a 2% request.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Did I? I can do it again. You're on now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can do this without coughing my head off. Scott, I got a couple of questions, if you don't mind. On 22.8-3, where we reduced nearly, I think it was, if I look at the right line here, about $1 million for a reduction based on enrollment. Do you know how many kids that was in that program, the Georgia Network for Educational Therapeutic, the GNETS program?
In fiscal year 16, the number of students, it's not exactly FTEs,
Right.
but it was 4,764.
But we're reducing this by nearly $1 million for, based on enrollment, so how many has it gone down, do you know?
I'd have to get you that the enrollment count went down by, it's somewhere.
Well, I'm just
a little under
questioning
100. It's not large, it's like.
Oh, it's not a large number,
50 to
okay.
100, that's right.
Okay, that was, well, okay, $1 million there, okay. On 23.11.4, I think it is, you talked about the sparsity grants and reducing that. And systems, it was a 2-year program or hold harmless for 1 year or 2 years, I believe you said. How many systems does that affect? Do you know roughly? Or just ballpark, if you.
Was it 28? I knew it.
Are you talking about how many are the whole, how many lose funds?
Yeah, I mean, it's
because of the
losing,
whole
and what's the intention, how they're gonna make up the money, I guess? If we got 20 systems that's gonna lose
Okay, I can tell you that now.
about $634,000.
There are 44 systems that are in sparsity in total, and 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, about half, a little under half of them are what we would call legacy. That is, they were in sparsity before we changed the
And
calculation.
they'll have to make that up with local funds, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. And one more, if you don't mind, on the local 5 mil share, you was talking about the 2013, the millage or the property tax digest went down. I guess my question is why we got such a lag? We're looking at 2016 budget. Why are we basing it on 2013 property tax digest?
Well, equalization and local fair share are both based on the tax digest from 2 fiscal years ago, actually
Okay.
calendar year 13.
Okay, so it is.
And we have talked about that, yes, sir. We get the tax digest from the state, equalized tax digest from the state auditors in November. And it's
For the
November-
current year, for you'll
November
be getting-
14. So we use a digest that's 2 fiscal years behind and 3 calendar years.
But there's no way we could get that, I mean, we should be getting that sooner. They have to file it with the Revenue Department like in September or November, don't they?
Yeah,
Well,
but
yes,
isn't
sir. There was
time lag because of getting
there was a hearing on that, and
equalizing it.
Sorry.
The calculations aren't based on the digest as the local county levies taxes. It's an equalized digest. So that if your digest is, instead of being done at 40%, if you're coming in at 38% or 41%, it's equalizing it back so it is equalized across the state. Everybody's fair share is in fact a fair share. And I'm sure it takes a little time to get that equalization factor.
well,
down.
it does. And again, this is really coming from Department of Audits, which has a digest. They equalize the digest, and Department of Revenue, where they're having to get information from the local districts. And I do remember a meeting, I think it was a Senate hearing, that talked about this. And it is just from being part of that hearing and listening to it, it does sound pretty complicated in terms of all the steps that have to take place in order for Department of Revenue to receive the information and then for the digest to be equalized. And that equalization is where the auditors look to make sure that essentially that it's a fair reflection of the value. So if a school district is undervaluing their property, there could be an adjustment based on the auditor's perspective, which says You might think your property is worth that much, but we actually think, looking at recent market value sales, that it's worth this much. And so what we get from the Department of Audits and used for purposes of local fair share and equalization is that equalized digest.
So it, in many cases, it actually takes more than 5 mills to pay your local fair share. Any other questions for Scott? Is it okay if I turn you off now?
Let me just ask you about Reese's. What's happening with our Reese's? Lots of money, lots of grants, lots of federal money.
The Reese's continue to, as always, to benefit from school improvement grants. They are an essential part, as you know, of our distributed network.
Critical.
They're absolutely critical.
I mean, they are.
We are, again, with federal funds, with Title I and other federal funds, particularly actually Title II, where we have more discretion, we are always utilizing the Reese's and as a distributed.
Are we getting them enough more money? Or?
Well, we're getting them what we can, meaning when we get more money from the feds, we would. The state amount has been flat in terms of how much we allocate. There has been some discussion, and I think it's a pretty good number. There was some discussion. We have increased the amount for the, and I'm talking state dollars for the Reese's for PBIS, which was positive behavioral intervention strategies. The original request of $560 million, this was back years, was intended for 5 staff members at the DOE, and the decision was to put that amount of money out through the Reese's. And the problem is that the Reese's have ended up with a partial staff member. And so what I'm usually hearing is that that tends to be the most problematic. Where we are paying for a math mentor, for example, we're able to pay for a full-time position. And where we're paying for IT, we're able to pay for a full-time position. So we are very lucky to be able to do that. For PBIS, it's been a little more problematic for the Reese's because they're having to contract with staff members. I have heard that. So I think if we were looking to adjust that, it would be adjusting the amount so that they could actually hire a full-time staff and not have to try and contract out, because it is somewhat difficult.
Thank you, Scott. And we have signed up several folks to speak. Okay, Matthew, you got your jacket on. You can come on now. Matthew Gamble with the Georgia School Counselors Association.
You members of the committee for giving us the opportunity to speak. I know y'all are probably on the edge of your seats right now with excitement, but always glad to come in front of you and have the opportunity to thank you for what you've done in the state budget for school counselors. One of the issues that we want to just mention to you, and I know I've already talked with you, Chairman Dixon, is the school counselor ratio change that we changed by law 2 years ago now, and that was at the recommendation of the last Finance Commission that met, and we changed that ratio to 1 to 450, and so the law was changed, but the funding that follows that never was specifically put in the budget. It is in there, and I do realize that it's more of a general nature, but that was really just the issue we wanted to bring before you today, and the information that you have in front of you just kind of outlines the Commission's recommendation. It was the second recommendation of that Commission, and it talks about what these ratios earn, the subgroups that are now under them as of this year, and gives you a little specific detail about what we're talking about today. And so with me today I have Jennifer Diaz. She is a school counselor in Gwinnett County, and she came to just share her perspective as a school counselor today, and certainly glad that she was able to come present before you today. So Jennifer, you want to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm Mr. Coleman. I'm very glad to be here today, and thank you for having us. I just wanted to speak to you about the experience of a school counselor. I am a school counselor in Gwinnett, and at my school I have 820 kids. I do my very best to work really, really hard to serve all of their needs, but quite often myself and school counselors in our position find it a little difficult. Our job, like many, is kind of like that of an octopus because my career development lessons may not necessarily have anything to do with the homeless issue for the student that I have to deal with in the morning. And that may not have anything to do with the study skills lessons that I have to do later that afternoon. We have so many different things that we have to do that aren't necessarily related in the matter of a school day. And having that many students, it just makes it hard for me to be able to serve all of my students' needs in a way that really is fair for all of them. School counselors are master's level professionals, and we are some of the only people trained in the building on crisis management, on career development and what that means for our students, and we really want to be able to do what we're trained to do for all of our children. Having that line item in the budget would allow us to be able to do that for all of our students, for all of Georgia's students, and make a bigger difference and really feel that sense of support. Again, I work really, really hard to meet my 820 kids' needs, but it's quite difficult. So if we could get that support from y'all to help us enforce that legislation, that would be wonderful.
Any questions or comments from members? Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sometimes we don't get to do everything we want to do on this committee. Let me assure you of that. Carol Lewis, Communities and Schools. You know, I was really pleased to hear Chairman Coleman say he was going to donate his whole salary to Communities and Schools.
We'll take it. Absolutely. You said that.
He's a generous guy.
Good afternoon. Again, we appreciate very much. I'm Carol Lewis, I'm the president of Communities and Schools Georgia, and we want to just thank you for the investment that this state has made in communities and schools. We are part of one of the nation's largest dropout prevention organizations, and want to also say that you are unique in the investment that this state has made in its communities and schools organizations across the state. So thank you very much. Just briefly tell you. Communities and Schools surrounds its students with the community support, empowering them to stay in school and achieve in life. And we're part of a national network which began here in Georgia. So that's why I also think it's extremely important that the work that we do is showcased across this nationally. Just the investment that we've had the opportunity to make, we're in 32 what we call local affiliates, 32 nonprofits that support schools and support the academic improvement and graduation rates of our students across the state. We facilitate tutoring programs, we facilitate career preparedness as well as post-secondary readiness. Our programs are kindergarten through 12th grades, and we meet the students where they are, where the needs are. We also manage a program called Performance Learning Center, which is a more intensive program, but we also operate from a place with what we call an independent 5-year study that's proved that the way we provide services works. And so we've been reviewed independently. We have been invested not only by you, but also by other businesses and communities. By AT&T has invested in our model and the outcome data. Also Walmart, Georgia Power believe in the work that we do, that we are able to help meet the economic needs and economic needs of our communities by ensuring that our students graduate. Please refer to, I think in your budget line item is 23.5 for communities and schools. The governor has recommended that this is at the same level that we were funded at last year. We hope that he's asking for a reasonable increase as we see the great need for the opportunity for expansion with communities and schools. Our goal is this year is to increase by 20,000 students across the state, and that means that's an additional 20 additional site coordinators serving at our school site level. I'm sorry, you had a question.
How much does it cost to add one school?
To add one school, one site coordinator costs us about $50,000 in personnel. That's the average cost. And then on top of that, for their training, travel, and the administration, is about another $25,000.
So about $75,000.
Yes, sir.
Pardon?
You had a question?
want to ask a question?
My question is, and this is just for educational purposes.
Yes, sir.
What is the difference between Communities in Schools Georgia, Communities in School Atlanta, with the funding that the state is providing to Communities in School Georgia? And then my understanding is that, for example, Clayton County, to bring Communities in School in Atlanta, that will cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 per school.
Correct.
In the district. Can you help me understand that a little bit?
Yes, sir. Communities in Schools Georgia is the, if you look at it as like a parent organization, or we're the wholesale side, and then the local affiliates, when I talk about 32 local affiliates, those are the ones who serve students directly. Our responsibility at the state level is to provide the training for the site coordinators to begin to develop a new program if you're going into a new community, and we have 6 of those right now. They're asking for Communities in Schools services. So our job at the state level is to be able to go in and develop a program in that district.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So with those affiliates in those districts, and you being the parent organization, is there no residuals coming from them up to the state level?
Well, currently the way it works is that we go out and find resources and opportunities and pass those through to the local levels. They still do fundraising at the local level. For every dollar that you invest, those local affiliates and the state office are finding $15 additional. So they're matching the monies that are invested from the state. Just as I said, AT&T has invested over $500,000 to ensure that site coordinators are provided at the local school site level and sustainable. Same thing with Georgia Power. Not only are they investing resources, but they're also investing personnel to serve on boards and also help them do fundraising locally.
Okay, and I ask those questions not to be critical,
No,
because I'm certainly supportive of CIS, and I'm actually trying to get them
In
into
Clayton County. Yes,
I
sir.
hosted a breakfast here a couple of months ago to try to get Clayton County to sign on. So those are questions for information, not to be critical.
Absolutely, and I'll be more than happy to answer any other questions that you have and help you.
Just to continue on with that, again, like I said yesterday, if you've ever visited these programs, if you've ever seen what they do, it's probably the most effective program I have ever seen for preventing high school dropout. And that was the point I wanted to make. You said, the part we put in is just like priming the pump, because we prime the pump and these other agencies drop in and put in a lot of money.
Yes, sir.
So, you're very dependent on contributions, Georgia Powers, the Deltas, or whatever you can get.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
not true?
Yes, sir. That's
no federal money.
We have a very small amount of federal money. We've gone from somewhere of 72% down to 25% in federal dollars. So the investment you make it helps. When I go to an AT&T, I said, my state is investing into each local community.
I'm just glad that Representative Glenn's trying to get them in Clayton, because I can't imagine, especially the smaller systems, any of them, not wanting to be interested in that program, what you do with students. You think I work for y'all and I was on the payroll, but I really believe that. I'll put an auction for him.
Yes, he did. He did.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate all that you do. Thank you very much.
We also have from Teach for America. You certainly may.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oshawa Helton. I'm the Vice President of External Affairs for Teach for America Metro Atlanta. We just wanted to thank the committee for consideration and share a little bit about where we are organizationally. As you know, Teach for America is the teacher and leader development program that recruits new college graduates as well as promising professionals to contribute to access to equitable and excellent education for under-resourced children, beginning as classroom teachers in low-income urban and rural schools across the country. Since 2000, over 3,000 Teach for America Metro Atlanta Corps members have taught close to 200,000 students across pre-K through 12th grades. In addition, we have over 1,100 alumni of the program who live and work in the region and support educational equity inside and outside of the classroom. This year, we have 218 Metro Atlanta Corps members who are teaching in 95 schools and affecting the lives of close to 14,000 students in hard-to-staff subject areas like math, science, and special education. In your packets, you'll see a spotlight on Clayton County and the work we're doing there in one of our region's most high-need districts. I wanted to sort of highlight that in addition to that direct service impact, with our alumni, 800 are still in education and 400 are actually still classroom teachers across Metro Atlanta. We also have 21 alumni who are school leaders as principals and assistant principals. We are requesting an increased appropriation this year to help replace some of the funds that we no longer have through Race to the Top. These funds will support our continued work in recruiting, selecting, training, placing, and providing professional development to our Corps members in the region. Our requested appropriation is similar to the support provided by sister states like Alabama and is smaller than states like North Carolina and South Carolina. North Carolina invests about $5 million annually, but this differential does support multiple Teach for America sites, which is a kind of direction we'd like to go in across the state of Georgia in coming years in response to student need as well as school and district demand. We really appreciate the state's support over the past several years and would benefit tremendously from increased investment, both to directly advance our work as well as a signal to our other funders across the region of the state's support of our work with Metro Atlanta students and families and communities. I welcome your questions and thank you all for your consideration.
Chairman Coleman.
We talked yesterday and dropped a piece of legislation on these recovery districts.
Yes.
And of course, I know y'all work in the highly impacted areas. That's what you take pride in.
Yes.
Have y'all done any work in New Orleans, Tennessee, and Memphis where they're doing this? Have y'all had any experience placing teachers in those recovery areas?
Teach for America nationally, definitely, yes. So Teach for America in New Orleans has had tremendous impact, and in many schools, half of the schools are comprised of current Corps members and alumni. So there's definitely knowledge organizationally across the country in such recovery school districts.
Do you think it'd be possible to maybe identify some of these that have worked in them and that we could have a conversation with them?
Absolutely.
That would be very helpful. I'd like to maybe get a group of them, we could talk with them.
Absolutely.
That have actually been in those recovery districts.
I think that would be great for us to learn from as well as to have the conversation come to the state.
And the second thing, and I ask this every year, of course, we're stressing in the governor's Education Reform Commission, training, finding, retaining good teachers. And we talked about y'all identify thousands, and you only can work with a few. And have y'all met with the chancellor yet and tried to work with our colleges of education here and see if we can find these you've identified maybe didn't take? I'm not saying they're not the best, but there's some that maybe for some reason that we could maybe work with our schools of education and maybe try to get them. I think that'd be because a lot of them we're losing, I think, that y'all have identified.
I think that's a really interesting proposal. It's one that has to go through our national office because recruitment is held nationally.
I know, right.
But we are excited to actually follow up on the conversation we had with you recently
I know y'all
on
been
that.
in university, y'all hit tech, you work with some of these and identified a lot of them. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Were you trying to get together a trip to New Orleans? Is that what you had?
I'm going to bring them here.
Oh.
I don't want to fly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of the 95 schools you mentioned, and be outside of Clayton County, how far-reaching throughout Georgia are you? What are some of the other areas that those 95 schools live in?
Yes, we're in Atlanta Public Schools, Fulton County Schools, Clayton County Schools, and then in 4 charter partners in the KIPP Network, Wesley International, and a couple others. So we're in the high concentration districts of Title I schools, and we'd love to continue to increase our reach as we sort of embark on this next chapter in Teach for America's growth.
So are you in any rural areas?
We're
to
not.
Speak of now?
Yeah,
Okay.
and we would love to be thinking about how to grow our impact across the state. The North North Carolina example is one that's great for us, where they started with an urban site, and then over the next several years, we're able to grow first one more rural site and then one fully rural site. So they're in eastern North Carolina, they're in the triad area in North Carolina that's surrounding the universities, and they're in Charlotte.
Well, can I follow up with one last question? Just going back to what Chairman Coleman asked, with whether the OSD becomes a reality or not for Georgia, it seems like that would be a good model. Those schools that have been identified to maybe target for TF, because I know there are a couple. There are several in my district, and they already have resources. I would almost tend to disagree that they should be on that list, but they would be prime. They already are prime for philanthropist type organizations. It seems like they would be really great to identify from that teaching aspect some students to go there.
Yes, we completely agree. Absolutely.
I think the two of you are on staff with Teach for America. Any other questions?
Good program.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe they did tell me, Margaret, that they were looking at some options for rural areas. Some of us have some heart for outside of Atlanta. Right. That concludes everybody who is on the list who asked to speak. If there is nothing else, first I want to say thank you to Sam, who spoke yesterday at on the presentation, and thought he did an excellent job. It probably is based on the excellent education he got in Dalton City schools, which I can't claim any credit for. That was not my system. But they got better because we pushed them. So, yeah, well, I think I don't have to ask. We're glad that y'all were here. We appreciate your attendance, and this meeting is adjourned.